Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And in this one, we are going to be breaking down all of the specializations in PvP and ranking them on their burst damage. Which ones are going to be able to deliver you that sweet, satisfying one-shot macro potential, and which ones maybe you want to avoid if you don't, if you don't want big burst damage, which I don't really know who would really not want big burst damage, but that's going to be the topic of today's video. Affliction Warlock, while it's historically not known for its burst damage, in this current patch of the War Within, it definitely does have potential with things like Haunt into instant Shadow Bolt. You can crack skulls with a lot of burst damage on Affliction Warlock. I wouldn't say that it is of the highest of all the available specializations, but it's definitely getting very close. I'm going to be putting this up onto the A tier for now, which may come as a surprise to a lot of players. But the Haunt into Shadow Bolt instant proc is really powerful. There's a tremendous amount of burst damage. Definitely worthy of putting it up onto the A tier. Arcane Mage is still holding true to its name. It still has a ton of burst damage, especially if you're able to line up all of its cooldowns together with Arcane Surge, Evocation, and Touch of the Magi. And once you've ramped through your Touch of the Magi and you've supercharged your Arcane Barrage, your peak burst damage sometimes can hit upwards of 1.5 to 2 million DPS. So Arcane has some of the most phenomenal one-shot potential in the game, but I will say that it takes a lot more ramp, and I think it is a lot easier to shut down. And because of those reasons, I'm gonna hold back reservations for putting it onto S tier. While its potential is as high, maybe even greater than some of the damage in S tier, I think that it's too long of a ramp. It's too easy to disrupt, and that's holding it down a bit. Arms Warrior has really good burst potential, whether you're playing Bladestorm damage with Slayer or you're playing Colossus and jumping in with that giant Demolish for a massive crit. Again, much like Arcane though, Demolish, you can kite away from it, you can crowd control it, you can really negate it. It takes a really long time to ramp up for it. Bladestorm, on the other hand though, is just really solid burst damage that's basically unpreventable in a lot of instances. But I think that because you can kite away from the Bladestorm, because you can get away from the Demolish, it's definitely limiting it for me. But I'm going to put it onto A tier as far as one shot and burst potential, regardless of the hero talent tree that you're playing. It's definitely up there, but I think the ability to avoid its one shot is what holds it back. Now, Assassination Rogue, it's a little bit more complicated to one-shot than a lot of other specializations, but you can definitely crack some really big crits with this one. And one of the best parts about it is once you get a target to low health, you're going to proc your sudden demise, which basically just instantly kills the target. So it's really good. It's got really gnarly burst damage, but it is a bit more complicated. I'm still going to put it onto S tier. I think the finishing power and burst damage of Assassination is absolutely astounding at the moment, but it will be harder to figure out. It'll take you a little bit more time to figure out than something like a balanced druid, which when you summon in your Force of Nature and your Incarnation and you pump out 2 quick cast Wraths into a Star Surge, you can absolutely destroy somebody almost immediately. And even if you don't get the hard cast Wraths, you can use instant Starfire procs or just combo a bunch of Star Surges together for a lot of instant cast burst damage. So for me, this is all really easy to do burst damage. It's really high on the charts. So I'm going to be putting it up here onto the S tier as far as burst damage potential. Beast Mastery Hunter has pretty much no burst damage. It does an overwhelming amount of sustained damage as compensation, but we're talking like you're going to see big crits. You might see like a couple, maybe 900k, 1.2 million Black Arrow procs every now and then, but it's not really that big. So I'm going to put it down here onto the D tier when it comes to one-shot potential. Blood Decay, I'm not ranking the tanks. The tanks might have some type of, maybe we'll just put them down here when we put them on the chart to confuse people. Demonology, much like Beast Mastery Hunter, not remarkable burst. You can get some decently sized demon bolts, peaking over 1 million. Same to Beast Mastery. These specs are just very similar to each other. They summon pets, they do sustained damage, they kind of ramp up their pressure. But as far as burst damage, it's just like maybe C tier. If you get all of your pets going out together and you combo some big demon bolt crits, I could see it maybe bursting a bit harder than Beast Mastery. So I'm going to put it up on the C tier, but it's very limited. Destro Lock, it's much like Arcane. This spec can crack out really big crits. It does a lot of damage with Chaos Bolt if you're able to cast them, but much like Arcane, you can be easily disrupted. You can be trained. So I think because it's more easily disrupted, I don't know though. Its damage is so high. It starts so high. You can just solo somebody if you're able to actually cast. This one's a really tough one. I think we're going to rank these from left to right as well. So if obviously melee against melee and ranged against ranged, but left to right means like this is the biggest burst, second burst, third burst, because otherwise it'd just be impossible to break this list down. Devastation Evoker. I honestly don't really notice Devastation Evoker one shot as hard as it used to be. I feel like its sustain and its disintegrate damage is honestly holding it more so than its fire breath one shot that it has had in previous patches. It does a remarkable amount of overall damage, but I'm just trying to think like single target burst. Is it really actually that bursty? I mean, it's probably A tier. We're just putting everything on the A tier, aren't we? I feel like all of these are actually really close to each other. I think it's probably burstier than Affliction, but maybe less than Arcane. It's easier to get the burst off though than Destruction. So it's a little bit of a trade-off, but I don't think it peaks as high as some of the Chaos Bolts that I've seen. Definitely not, but it's definitely still up there for burst damage. Discipline Priest can actually do a decent amount of burst damage as a healer. With Ultimate Penance, you can get a ton of damage out. So I'm actually going to put Disc as like a B tier. Like you can get a pretty decent amount of one-shot potential out with all your cooldowns. Ellie Shaman is obviously the best one-shot range spec in the game. It does so much damage with Earth Shock. Basically, it's just Chaos Bolt, but it's instant. Everything's instant. You can't be kicked. You're just rocking and rolling and knocking everybody down. So, yeah, Ellie Shaman is insane burst damage right now. Just will absolutely destroy people. Enhancement Shaman is also, we're putting Enhancement Shaman here. I'm actually putting it above Assassination. I think the Stormbringer Enhancement Shaman build, you pretty much spam one button, it's instant cast, and do insane burst damage. You'll just clock people's health bars so fast, so rapidly. Feral Druid, you can still get some decently sized bites, but I feel like it's kind of mid. I don't feel like I'm dying to Feral Druid, quote unquote, randomly really at all. So I'm going to put Feral Druid kind of just in the middle of the pack. It's really good spec, but as far as like one shot potential, it's just kind of eh. Fire Mage, I really don't notice this class, whether it's sustain or burst. It's just kind of non-existent. But I would imagine that it's got better burst than Beast Mastery Hunter. So I'll probably put it like somewhere with Demonology, but probably less than Demonology for now in this kind of bottom side. Frost Mage can get really good damage out with Comet Storm and the Meteor combo with the Ray of Frost. You can get a lot of burst damage with that. Can be a little bit easier to disrupt in that sense. But I definitely think that this is like definitely worthy of A tier, probably better than Devastation. I feel like just the instant Frost Firebolt procs that you can get that you can pump out. It's probably better than Arcane. Maybe it's better than Destro just because of the accessibility to its instant burst is a lot more than these and can be a bit more volatile. Frost DK, this is going up onto the S tier. This guy does so much burst damage. One of the best bursting specs in the game. Will absolutely destroy tons of enemies if you can grip them all together and cleave them down. You do so much burst damage with Obliterate at the moment. Definitely one of the best one-shot classes. Fury Warrior, now you can play Death Wish, and you can get a lot of really powerful damage out with Death Wish, especially if you're playing with ranged DPS on the Fury Warrior, or if you have a healer and a BG, it can be really fun. And I think the Slayer Bladestorm does a lot of damage. It's much like Arms Warrior in that sense. But I don't think it one-shots people. If you're a Boomkin, you get one-shots, and now my bias from what I play is coming through. I feel like it's probably more so on the mid. It's probably better than Feral Druid, but still kind of like middle ground. We're not doing the tanks. Havoc Demon Hunter, you got pretty much, I want to say like next to no one-shot. I'm putting you down here in D tier. You can get like Fell Surge procs and do a decent amount of damage during your metamorphosis, which might feel a bit chunky, but it's like that's such a long window between, and I really don't think it's that high of burst damage. So it's a really, I think it's a decently strong spec, but burst damage is definitely not its forte. Holy Priest, you're just kind of meh. You don't really like. You would think you're burstier than Disc, but I swear you're not even burstier than Disc. You kind of just don't do much. I'm putting you down here. Holy Paladin, now this can get really big crits. It can get big judgment crits, especially when you get the procs. Hammer of Wrath can hit really hard, so I'm going to put Holy Paladin up with Disc as far as damage profile. Marksmanship Hunter, really good burst damage at the moment, but really squishy. Can definitely overwhelm, but it kind of depends on what you're attacking. If you're taking plate, it does a lot less. So I think because of the limitations on what you're attacking, I'm actually going to put it a little bit lower. I'm going to put it onto B tier as far as burst potential. Mistweaver Monk can get really big burst. You can get really big wind strike hits. I've seen upwards of 1 million plus hits with this. Its Crackle does decent damage for burst, and you have Touch of Death. You got the only healer that can instantly just execute a target when it gets low. So I actually put Mistweaver a little bit higher for the healers as far as burst. Outlaw Rogue pretty much has next to no burst damage from my experience. This is going to be a slow grind, just whittling the target down. So I'm going to put Outlaw Rogue here onto D tier. Probably the lowest burst any. Maybe BM Hunter is lower, but again, I think comparing range to range, melee to melee is better. Preservation Evoker is going up on S tier. This guy does so much burst damage. You can get a huge combo off with NS Fire Breath and instant Chrono Flames. And this is, if you want to play the healer and burst people, you're definitely going to be playing Preservation Evoker. Now we got Resto Shaman. You don't really have any time to do damage on Resto Shaman, but Lava Burst can hit very hard. So if you do ever actually have time to do it, I'm probably going to put it kind of just like in the middle here with Holy Paladin. You can get some decently sized Lava Burst crits out on players, but you're really going to struggle to have time as a healer. Resto Druid, you can play Convoke. It's kind of cheesy, but I almost see like nobody ever actually doing it in any real competitive format. It's kind of like a Mimi 2v2 thing. I don't think its burst is that great, but it's because of Convoke potential. I'll probably say it's still better than Holy Priest, and the instant Wrath spam of Star Surge I think is even better than Holy Priest. Holy Priest just does not do well in the damage department for the healers. Ret Paladin, I think this is the number one shot spec in the game. It's just remarkable the amount of damage it does with Wake of Ashes into Hammer of Light. You'll just absolutely every time it pops up, and it seems like it's happening so often, so easily. Just one button press, you're just instantly dead. Just like, what is going on? I don't understand. I think that it's definitely deserving of the number one spot. Shadow Priest can have decent burst damage with Void Torrent. If Void Torrent and your Entropic Rift, you can manage to get like a really big crit. You can get a big pop with it, but it's really obvious animation, can be avoided, really long ramp. I feel like its burst is definitely not its strength. I'm going to put it down here with Fire Mage. Maybe it's better than Demo. It's probably better than Demo. But it's definitely a lot more limited. Subtlety Rogue, this guy's also going up onto the S tier. I think you probably have a harder one-shot than Assassination. Again, the Rogue specs are a lot harder to pull off their one-shots than that of a Ret Paladin. But its potential threshold is definitely equal to, and maybe in some cases even greater than, especially with kill conditions like Smoke Bomb and Shadowy Duel. I think it can definitely hit those points. But these guys are definitely going to be delivering you like really big burst experiences. Survival Hunter can get really good burst with Wildfire Bombs and all of your cooldowns. And honestly, they're pretty frequently available as well. I think Survival is probably one of the sleeper melee when it comes to one-shot damage. I actually think it's burstier than Fury or Feral. I'm going to put it up here with Arms Warrior. Maybe even higher than Arms Warrior just because it's easy to get the damage off. There's no ramp. It's not really that, like, traceable. I like Arms, where you see them ramping up and they've got their stacks and then they send it with big animation. It's kind of just boom, boom, wildfire bombs have hit you and you've lost a lot of your health. Definitely one of the more sleeper ones. Unholy DK, you might get like a decent Apocalypse hit, but it's like, I'd say it's pretty average. I don't think its one shot is that remarkable. I'm going to put it down onto C tier. It's kind of just more like a ramp sustain. That's kind of where the pet classes fit as far as fantasy as well, I think. So, but it can get up there with the APOC. I'd say more than these specs as far as its potential, but it's not superb. Vengeance, we're not going into the tank specs. Windwalker is actually a really hard one for me to just rank off the top of my head as far as one shot, because in the past it's been one of the biggest one shots in the game, but I feel like its one shot is not as scary, especially relative to like Ret Paladin, Frosty, or Subrogue at the moment. So I don't think it's actually as high as it may have historically been here in the War Within Season 1. But it's still up there. I want to say that it still really gets some really big burst damage during Celestial Conduit, during Storm, Earth, and Fire, but I don't notice it as oppressively as a lot of the other melee in those higher ranks. So for me, I'm going to put it probably here with Survival Hunter somewhere on A tier. And then Augmentation Evoker. This spec is really not that great in the game at all, but when it comes to one shot, I actually think it's better than Devastation. So I'm doing something really strange here. I'm putting Augmentation in S tier. This might be the only tier list that Augmentation Evoker actually makes S tier. It's probably the only thing it's got is some cheesy one shot that if the enemies have any add-ons or awareness to what your class does, you will never kill anything. But if they don't and you're at lower rankings, you can absolutely mow people down. And it's very easy with just the Deep Breath one-shot macro that you would expect that Devastation Evoker used to pull off. But I think Dev's one-shot's fallen off a bit since then. Maybe we say Dev is I think it's better than Arcane. We'll put Dev above Arcane just because of the ramp difficulties there. But that's basically my experience with the classes as far as like when I'm fighting against them or when I'm playing as them. for their one-shot potential, their burst damage, like the threshold where you're just like, what just happened? Like, oh my god, I just killed him. That happens a lot in the S tier. It can happen in the A tier. It starts to happen a lot less frequently in the B tier, and really in the C and the D, you just start not noticing like the, oh my god, what was this damage for these classes. So I hope you guys enjoyed this fun breakdown. Hope it's helped you kind of decide as far as maybe like picking a specialization. If you want to pick one that's more oriented around burst damage, or if you want to pick one that's more oriented around sustained damage, and if you want to make sure that you're staying up to date with news related to World of Warcraft, then make sure to smash the subscribe button. Your support is greatly appreciated.